This is the story of Huldah, a faithful woman who learned that God can use faithful women powerfully to confirm His truth and spark revival. Once upon a time, Huldah sat quietly in her courtyard, turning over a piece of linen in her hands. Her eyes, though gentle, carried a sharpness that came from years of listening closely to God. Huldah had always been different. Even as a young girl, she didn't run to the market to gossip or spend her days decorating her hair like the other girls. Instead, she loved to slip away to quiet corners, listening for God's voice in the wind, in the songs of birds, and in the stillness of her own heart. As she grew, people began to notice her wisdom. Neighbors would come with small questions, then bigger ones, and always left with a strange peace they didn't understand. Huldah never forced her words. She only spoke when she felt God's whisper inside her. Meanwhile, in the palace, a young king named Josiah had begun to rise. Unlike many kings before him, Josiah's heart burned for truth. He hated the idols scattered across Judah and tore them down one by one. When he was still young, he ordered the temple to be repaired, hoping to restore true worship to God. During that work, something shocking happened. An old scroll was found, the book of the law, dusty and almost forgotten. When Josiah heard it read aloud, he tore his royal robes in grief. He realized just how far the people had drifted from God. Josiah's heart ached for his people. He wanted to know what God would say, what they should do, and if there was still hope. But instead of calling on the many loud prophets in the city, his officials were sent to Huldah, the quiet woman who didn't seek attention but carried God's voice like a flame inside her. Huldah looked up from her linen, sensing the heavy footsteps coming toward her home. She knew why they were coming before they even spoke. She whispered to herself, "Lord, give me courage to say exactly what you want, no more and no less." The memory of her childhood flooded her mind, her father's voice telling her, "If God gives you words, speak them bravely, even if no one else stands with you." She set aside the linen and stood, her heart steady. Even though she was just one woman in a city full of powerful men and royal messengers, she knew the power didn't come from her. It came from the one who had always chosen unlikely messengers to carry his unstoppable truth. And as the king's officials approached her doorway, their faces pale and eyes full of questions, Huldah knew this was the moment she had been prepared for all her life. When the officials finally reached her, Huldah could see the nervous tremble in their hands and the sweat on their foreheads. These were important men, used to barking orders and watching people scatter. But today, they looked like boys who had lost their way in the dark. She greeted them calmly, her eyes warm but firm. One of the officials stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Huldah, we come from King Josiah. The book of the law has been found in the temple, and the king has heard its words. He fears God's anger and wonders what will happen to us, to our people." Huldah studied their faces, her gaze steady as a quiet river. She could see the cracks in their confidence, the fear that maybe all their strength and walls and armies would not be enough to protect them from the truth. She nodded slowly. "Sit down," she said, motioning to a low stone bench nearby. They hesitated, but obeyed. These were men who were not used to taking commands from a woman, but something in her voice left no room for argument. Huldah folded her hands in her lap and looked up at the sky for a long moment before speaking. "You want an easy answer," she said softly, her voice gentle but strong enough to cut through their panic. "But God's truth is not meant to make us comfortable. It is meant to change us." The officials exchanged nervous glances. One of them opened his mouth, but she raised a hand slightly, and he fell silent. She took a slow breath. "Tell the king this. God has seen the way his people have turned away, worshiping wood and stone instead of him. The words in that book are true, and the judgment it warns about is coming." The men's shoulders sagged as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over them. But Huldah wasn't finished. Her voice softened again. "Yet tell the king this also, because his heart was tender, and because he humbled himself and wept before God when he heard the words. God has seen him too. He will not see this disaster with his own eyes. He will die in peace." The official closest to her swallowed hard, his lips trembling. But why you? Why did God choose to speak this through you, a woman?" he blurted out, almost without meaning to. Huldah looked at him calmly, a small spark in her eyes. "Because I listen," she said. "Because I do not twist his words to please the crowd. Because I care more about his voice than my own safety or reputation." Silence filled the courtyard. The officials bowed their heads, suddenly aware that they stood on holy ground, not because of the stones beneath them, but because of the truth echoing in Huldah's words. She stood then, smoothing her robe with graceful hands. "Go back to Josiah," she said, her voice now quiet as a prayer. "Tell him everything, and remind him, real change starts not in the temple walls, but in the heart." The officials rose slowly, still stunned, and turned to leave. As they walked away, Huldah stood alone for a moment, her hands pressed together against her chest. She felt no pride in being chosen, only a deep, fierce joy in being God's messenger. She lifted her face to the sky and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, even when the world does not." And in that simple, powerful moment, Huldah knew that her voice, though small in the eyes of many, had carried the weight of a kingdom's turning point. After the officials left, the courtyard felt still, almost like the hush after a great storm. Huldah sat back down, her heart beating slowly and steadily. She let her fingers trail across the folds of her robe, thinking back to the earliest moments when she first learned to hear God's voice. She remembered being a young girl sitting beside her grandmother as she ground wheat. While other children played, Huldah would ask questions no one else seemed to care about. What does God sound like? Why does he speak to some but not to others? Her grandmother would smile, tuck a wildflower behind Huldah's ear, and say, "Child, God speaks to those who make room for him, in their hearts and in their days." Huldah smiled at the memory now, pressing her hand over her hair as if she could still feel the flower there. She thought about the years that followed, the lonely nights when her prayers felt like pebbles tossed into a dark well, the mornings she rose early just to sit in the quiet and listen. People often thought she was strange. Some whispered that she was too serious, too quiet, too intense. But Huldah never felt alone. She felt God walking beside her like a patient friend, guiding her step by step even when no one else noticed. She glanced at the empty bench where the officials had sat moments before. Their wide eyes and trembling hands were proof of how rare true words had become. "Lord," she whispered now, "thank you for training me in hidden places. Thank you for every unnoticed hour you spent shaping my heart." She closed her eyes and let her mind drift to King Josiah. She had never met him face to face, but she admired him from afar. A young king who refused to follow the crooked paths of his ancestors. A boy who had become a man after God's own heart. She pictured him now, robe torn, eyes wide with sorrow, hands clutching the ancient scroll. She felt the weight of his grief as if it were her own. She whispered again, "Strengthen him. Let his hunger for you become a wildfire in this land. Let his tears plant seeds of life that will grow long after he is gone." A gentle breeze stirred the linen cloth on her lap, as though God himself was answering her prayer in a language only she could understand. For a moment, Huldah felt small, like a single candle in a vast night. But she also felt powerful, because she knew it wasn't her flame that mattered, but the one who had lit it. She opened her eyes, her gaze strong and clear. "Whatever you ask of me next," she said firmly, "I will say yes." And in that quiet courtyard with no fanfare, no trumpets, and no crowds, God's plan was moving forward, carried on the shoulders of a woman who had chosen to listen when the whole world was too busy shouting. As the sun climbed higher, golden light spilled across Huldah's courtyard, touching each stone and flower like a gentle blessing. She stood and moved to a clay jar filled with water, dipping her hands in and splashing her face. The coolness woke her fully, sharpening her focus. Huldah wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve, then looked out over the rooftops of Jerusalem. From her courtyard she could see narrow paths winding like tiny rivers between houses. She knew those paths well, each corner holding stories of children playing, mothers calling out, elders sharing wisdom at gates. She pressed her palms together and bowed her head. "Lord, these are your people," she prayed softly. "They have strayed so far, yet you still watch them with love. Wake them up, even if it must come through hard truth." A dove landed on the courtyard wall, cooing softly. Huldah watched it tilt its head as if listening. She smiled faintly. "My voice is small," she admitted to the dove, "but when it carries your words, it becomes stronger than any army's shout." She turned to her small storage room and took out a folded shawl, draping it over her shoulders. As she did, she remembered the many times she had sat there, weaving, whispering prayers into every thread. Each prayer had been a quiet seed for her neighbors, for wandering children, for the leaders of Judah. She had no idea when or if they would sprout. But now, with Josiah's heart broken open and the book of the law rediscovered, she felt the first green shoots pushing through the soil. She walked to the doorway, looking out at the city below. Merchants were opening their stalls. Women carried water jars on their hips, and the morning songs of workers floated up in the air. Huldah raised her hand slightly as if she could gather the whole city into her arms. "Turn their hearts back to you, Lord," she prayed aloud. "Not halfway, not just in fear, but fully. Hearts soft, ears open, eyes wide for your light." She stood there for a long time, letting the breeze lift the edge of her shawl. In that moment, she didn't feel like a prophetess being waited on by royal messengers. She felt like a mother watching over children, longing for them to find their true home again. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't from sorrow alone. It was from hope. A bright, fierce hope that God's words, once spoken, would ripple through the city like water through a dry field. She lowered her arms and whispered, "Let this be the beginning of something new, something lasting." Then she stepped back inside, took a deep breath, and sat down again with her linen. Her fingers moved calmly, but her spirit felt as sharp and ready as a drawn arrow. She knew more visitors might come, more questions, maybe even anger or disbelief. But Huldah had decided long ago her yes to God would echo louder than any no from the world. And in that quiet decision, the foundation of true revival was already beginning to tremble under the feet of a nation that didn't yet realize just how much it needed to return home. Huldah laid the linen across her lap again, but this time her hands stayed still. Her mind felt like a river flowing in many directions at once. She wondered how Josiah would feel when he heard her message in full, the sharp edges of judgment, the promise of mercy for him alone. Would he weep again? Would he rise stronger or fall into despair? She traced a small pattern in the linen, her finger moving in slow circles. "God," she whispered, "you see what's coming. You see the trembling in his heart, the weight in his young shoulders. Hold him close when my words reach his ears." She remembered her own trembling when she first understood that God was truly speaking through her. She had been just a girl then, hiding behind the fig tree in her family's yard, certain the breeze was calling her name. Her father had found her there, cheeks wet with tears. He had crouched down, touched her chin, and said, "The world will not expect you to be a voice, Huldah. But God delights in surprises." That moment felt like yesterday. She breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the courtyard stones under her feet. Would the people listen when Josiah called them to change? Or would they cling to their idols like children gripping broken toys? Huldah shut her eyes, imagining the idols toppling, the altars burning, the scroll being read aloud to crowds in the sun. She could almost hear the echo of children asking their mothers, "Who is this God? Why did we forget him?" A small smile tugged at her lips. Even in judgment, God always left a doorway open for return. That was his kindness, sharper than any sword, yet softer than morning rain. She opened her eyes and looked around her simple home. No golden walls, no royal guards, no thrones, just stones and sunlight, linen and prayer. Yet somehow, this quiet space had become a stage for God's words. A sudden breeze lifted her hair, and she reached up to tuck it behind her ear. She knew not everyone would welcome her words. Some might mock her for speaking with authority. Some might accuse her of pride or foolishness, but she had settled it in her heart long ago. Her loyalty was to God, not to applause. Standing, she folded the linen carefully and placed it back in its basket. She moved slowly but with resolve, as if every step set new roots of courage deeper in her spirit. "Let them come," she whispered, lifting her chin. "Let them question. Let them doubt. But your words will remain standing long after every idol crumbles." Then she sat back down, hands resting on her knees, her gaze soft but unwavering. In that moment, she felt like a small candle in a vast room, but she knew a single flame could set a whole forest alight. And so she waited again, her heart steady, her mind strong, and her spirit wide open to whatever God would ask of her next. The day stretched on, and the courtyard slowly filled with the warm glow of the afternoon sun. Huldah stayed seated, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her thoughts quietly circling the message she had just sent through the officials. Soon she heard distant footsteps on the stone path beyond her gate. Voices drifted closer, low, urgent, almost afraid to rise above a whisper. She stood and stepped toward the gate, her heart calm but watchful. A young woman she recognized from the temple neighborhood came rushing in, her breath shallow, eyes wide. "Huldah!" she called, stumbling slightly as she ran across the courtyard. "The king! King Josiah has torn his robes again. He is gathering the priests and the elders. People say he wants everyone to hear the words of the book of the law in the open square." Huldah's eyes softened, and a slow, steady breath filled her lungs. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her voice so low only the wind could hear. The young woman stepped closer, catching her breath. They say he's destroying the idols, tearing them down with his own hands. The people are terrified, but some are crying too. They say it feels like waking up from a long, dark dream." Huldah reached out and took the young woman's hands gently. "Do not be afraid of the shaking," she said, her voice strong and kind. "When God's light enters dark places, there is always trembling first. But after the trembling comes healing." The young woman's lips parted, her eyes filling with tears. Will it really work? Can we really come back to God? Huldah squeezed her hands. "Anyone can come back, no matter how far they have wandered," she said firmly. "Repentance is a door that stays open until the very last moment. We only have to walk through it." The young woman nodded, her tears falling freely now. Then she turned and ran back down the path, her feet kicking up little clouds of dust behind her. Huldah watched her disappear, her heart swelling with a quiet, fierce joy. She turned back into the courtyard, feeling the gentle warmth of the stones under her bare feet. Slowly she sat again, folding her hands in her lap and bowing her head. "Thank you for Josiah's tender heart," she prayed. "Thank you for every idol smashed, every altar burned, every ear that will finally hear your words." She thought of Josiah, the young king with a heart that bent like a willow in the wind, yet stood firm like an oak when it mattered most. She imagined him standing before his people, scroll in hand, voice trembling but true. She could almost hear his words echoing across the city. "Return to the Lord. He is merciful. Do not be afraid." Huldah felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. They were not tears of grief. They were the rain that came after a long, dry season. She lifted her face to the sky, letting the sun catch the wetness on her cheeks. "Let this be only the beginning," she whispered. "Let this fire spread from heart to heart until the whole land burns with love for you again." In that moment, Huldah felt the quiet certainty that God had not just used her voice to deliver a message. He had used it to crack open the walls around many hearts, including her own. In the days that followed, Huldah's courtyard seemed to catch every echo from the city below. Each morning she heard the clatter of stones as idols were pulled down and smashed into dust. Each afternoon voices rose in new songs, shaky and unsure at first, but growing stronger every day. One morning a young boy ran past her gate shouting, "The king! The king is reading the book aloud in the square. Everyone is there, men, women, even the children." Huldah stood at her gate, her hands clasped together over her chest. She didn't go down into the square herself. She didn't need to see it with her eyes to know it was real. She could feel it like a heartbeat beneath her feet. A neighbor passed by, pausing to call over the wall, "Huldah, did you hear? They found hidden shrines even inside some houses. They're clearing them out today." She nodded, her eyes gentle. "I heard," she said softly. "May their hearts be cleared too." When she returned to her bench, she sat with her linen again, but this time she wasn't sewing. Instead, her fingers traced the edge of the cloth as she prayed silently. "Lord," she breathed, "let them not stop at the tearing down. Teach them to plant new devotion where the old idols stood. Let them not only remove, but rebuild in you." She thought of the people, the mothers who had taught their children songs to false gods, the fathers who had offered sacrifices to stones. She imagined their shame, their confusion, their trembling first steps toward the real, living God. She prayed for them each by name, as many as she could remember: Rena, the olive seller; Benaiah, the potter; Tamar, the widow by the gate. She whispered the names like a string of precious pearls. All her life, she had believed obedience didn't need to shout. She had seen it in her grandmother's quiet prayers, in her own choice to listen when others gossiped, in her steady hands when others trembled. Now, she saw it rising across the city, shining brighter than any torch. Late in the afternoon, a small group of women stopped at her courtyard, hesitant but curious. One of them stepped forward. "Huldah," she called softly, we don't know how to pray. We don't even know the right words. Can you teach us?" Huldah rose, her shawl slipping from her shoulders like a gentle wave. She stepped toward them, her face bright and open. "You start by being honest," she said, her voice warm as summer honey. "Tell God exactly where you are, your fears, your hopes, your failures. He doesn't want perfect words. He wants your true heart." The women nodded slowly, some tears already forming. Huldah smiled and opened her arms. "Come," she said, "sit with me." They entered her courtyard, and soon the air was filled with soft sobs and whispered prayers, clumsy, awkward, beautiful. And as they learned to speak to God for themselves, Huldah felt her heart rise like a bird into the clear evening sky. She realized then that God's revival wasn't only happening in city squares or royal courts. It was blooming right here, one trembling prayer at a time. Huldah sat with the women in her courtyard as the sun slipped lower, painting the walls gold and pink. The linen lay forgotten now, and her hands stayed open, palms up, as if catching each fragile prayer like a falling petal. The first woman, Miriam, spoke with her head bowed low. "Lord, I don't know how to love you. I've only known fear. Show me how to love you for real." Huldah nodded gently. "That is a true prayer," she whispered, her eyes shining. Next, Tamar, her voice shaking like a leaf, said, "I offered oil to idols, thinking they would help my children. Forgive me. Show me the better way." Tamar began to weep, and Huldah reached across, cupping her hands around Tamar's trembling fingers. "He hears you," she said softly. "He is not far away. He is right here, closer than your own breath." A third woman, Zipporah, stayed silent at first, her gaze fixed on a crack in the stones. Huldah waited patiently, never rushing her. Finally, Zipporah took a deep breath. I don't know if I'm worth forgiving," she said, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "I've lived in lies so long, I don't know who I am without them." Huldah's heart squeezed tightly in her chest. She moved closer and laid her hand on Zipporah's shoulder. "When God looks at you, He sees the daughter He created, not the mistakes," she said, her voice like a soft river. "He already knows your true name, even if you've forgotten it." Zipporah looked up then, her eyes wet but bright with something new, a small spark of hope flickering in the ashes of shame. The courtyard fell into a gentle silence. Birds began to settle in the fig tree above, their wings rustling like whispered amens. Huldah turned her gaze upward, her lips moving in a silent prayer of gratitude. She felt something powerful in that moment. Not loud or grand like a battle horn, but deep and unstoppable, like roots breaking open hard earth beneath their feet. One of the women, Shoshana wiped her tears and glanced around. "Huldah," she said quietly, Do you think we can help others too? Maybe teach our daughters? Maybe tell our husbands?" Huldah's eyes sparkled with joy. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and warm. "This is how it begins. One heart, then another. It spreads like fire in dry grass, gentle at first, then impossible to stop." Miriam leaned forward, excitement pushing past her shyness. "But how? We're just ordinary women." Huldah laughed softly, a clear, ringing sound that filled the courtyard like sweet perfume. "Ordinary women are God's favorite surprise," she said. "He loves using quiet voices to bring loud change. You do not have to shout. You only have to live it." They sat together long after the stars began peeking out above them, each woman holding a new kind of warmth in her heart. Huldah watched them, her own heart swelling with quiet pride. Not the kind that puffs up, but the kind that stands tall like a tree after a long rain. She saw them as seedlings, fragile but ready to grow. She imagined them in their homes, lighting lamps and sharing gentle words that would echo down generations. When they finally stood to leave, each woman paused to hug her, holding on a moment longer than they might have yesterday. "You are not leaving empty," Huldah whispered to each one as they passed. "You carry the light now. Let it show you the way." One by one, they slipped out into the night, their heads higher than when they had entered. When the courtyard fell silent again, Huldah knelt on the stone floor, her forehead touching the earth. "Lord," she whispered, "you do more with a few humble hearts than with 1,000 grand speeches. Thank you for letting me see your quiet victories." She stayed there, breathing in the night air, feeling her spirit rise and stretch like a vine toward the stars. And in that hush, Huldah knew she had seen the true beginning of revival. Not in kingly decrees or torn down idols alone, but in trembling hands lifted, in small voices finding the courage to say, "Here I am." Long after the women had gone and the stars dotted the sky like tiny lamps, Huldah remained kneeling on the courtyard stones. Her knees ached, but she didn't move. Her mind drifted to Josiah again, the young king standing before his people, holding the sacred scroll as if it were a living heartbeat. She pictured his tear-streaked face, the tremble in his hands, and the fiery determination in his eyes. "Lord," she prayed softly, "keep his spirit tender. Let him never forget the trembling that led him to you." She sat back finally, leaning against the courtyard wall. A cool breeze swept in, brushing a strand of hair across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear absent-mindedly and looked up at the stars. In that shimmering quiet, her thoughts wandered back to her own journey. She remembered the first time she had felt God's whisper press into her spirit like a warm hand. She had been no more than a girl hiding from chores in her grandmother's storeroom. She had heard no thunder, no loud voice, just a gentle, unmistakable stirring deep inside. That stirring had grown over the years, shaping her into someone her neighbors didn't quite understand. While others worried about market prices and gossip, she listened for breezes that carried more than just dust. Now, she realized, every quiet moment had been preparing her for this season. A faint sound drew her eyes to the gate. A young boy stood there, peeking in shyly. He held a clay jar in both hands, clearly too heavy for him. Huldah stood and walked toward him, her smile gentle. "Shalom, little one," she greeted, bending down to his level. "What have you brought?" He swallowed hard. "My mother. She said to bring you this oil. She said you would know what to do with it." Huldah took the jar carefully, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said warmly. "And tell your mother that her gift will be used to light prayers that will reach heaven." The boy's eyes widened, and he gave a quick nod before scurrying away into the night. Huldah carried the jar into the courtyard, setting it beside her. She ran her hand along its rim, feeling the cool clay. She knew then that her role wasn't finished. Her voice had cracked open doors, but now her hands would help guide the next steps. People would come, not just officials or curious neighbors, but families, children, and those too afraid to ask in public. She would teach them to pray. She would show them how to open their hearts instead of their pockets. She would remind them that God wanted truth in their deepest places, not just empty sacrifices. Huldah stood again, lifting her face to the stars. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice strong and steady. "However long you need me here, however many come, I will speak. I will teach. I will pour out every drop of light you've given me." A sudden peace washed over her, as if the night itself had drawn closer to listen. She picked up the jar of oil, holding it to her chest like a precious promise. And in that moment, Huldah felt the quiet surge of God's revival moving like a new river through the land. Not loud and crashing, but deep and unstoppable, carving new paths in even the hardest hearts. The next morning, Huldah rose before the sun. She lit a small lamp with the oil the boy had brought and set it in the center of her courtyard. The gentle glow seemed to breathe with each breeze that slipped past. As she stood there, tying her shawl around her shoulders, she heard soft footsteps on the path. First came a young mother carrying a baby strapped to her back. Her eyes were tired but hopeful. "I heard you help people learn to pray," she said shyly. Huldah nodded, stepping forward to guide her inside. "Come," she said gently. "You are welcome here." Next came an older man, his hands scarred from years of work at the forge. He held a small piece of broken iron, his eyes downcast. "I've spent my whole life shaping metal, but never shaped my heart," he confessed, voice rough with shame. Huldah took his hand in both of hers. "God can shape hearts softer than any iron," she assured him. "You are not too late." Soon after, a young couple arrived, arguing in whispers as they approached. They stopped when they saw her, embarrassed. "We don't know how to fix our home," the husband admitted. "We've tried everything but end up shouting more than praying." Huldah listened patiently, then motioned them closer. "Start by opening your hearts to God first. You can't rebuild a house on cracked stones," she said, her words as soft as a lullaby but sharp enough to reach the deepest places. By midday, more people had gathered in her courtyard. They sat on woven mats and low stools, some hugging their knees, some resting their heads in their hands. Huldah moved among them like a steady flame, stopping to listen, to comfort, to guide. She didn't give them rehearsed speeches. She gave them small steps. Confess honestly. Forgive completely. Listen more than you speak. Trust that God sees you, even when no one else does. At one point, a girl barely 12 years old approached, clutching a small clay flute. Her eyes were wide with fear. "My father says I should play for the old idols," she whispered. "But I don't want to anymore. I want to play for God." Huldah knelt down, her eyes level with the girl's. "Then play," she said, smiling gently. "Play for him now." The girl lifted the flute to her lips, and a trembling, pure note filled the courtyard. The sound rose into the morning sky, weaving around the olive branches above like a prayer turned into music. Some of the people began to weep quietly. Others bowed their heads, moved in ways they couldn't describe. Huldah closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her own cheeks. In that single, fragile melody, she heard the beginning of a new kind of worship rising in Judah. One not born of obligation, but of pure devotion. When the girl finished, Huldah reached out and hugged her tightly. "That was a gift to God," she whispered. "He heard every note." As the sun passed overhead and shadows shifted across the courtyard, Huldah looked around at the growing circle of changed hearts. She saw not just individuals, but seeds. Seeds that would be carried home, planted in kitchens, workshops, streets, and rooftops. Seeds that would bloom in children's questions, in shared meals, in whispered prayers before sleep. Huldah realized then that her task was not just to confirm judgment, but to prepare hearts for new life. She stood taller, her spirit shining as bright as the lamp at the center of the courtyard. And in that moment, she knew with a quiet certainty revival wasn't coming in a royal chariot. It was already here, tiptoeing in on humble feet, one trembling prayer at a time. As the days passed, the courtyard became a quiet heartbeat in the middle of the city. People came in groups and alone at dawn and under moonlight. The old stones, once just a place for washing and weaving, now echoed with new life: prayers, tears, laughter, and confessions. Huldah moved through it all like a patient gardener, planting words of truth and watering fragile hopes. One afternoon, as the olive branches swayed softly overhead, a group of boys shuffled nervously at her gate. They were rough, around the edges, dusty knees, torn tunics, eyes sharp with mischief but shadowed with something deeper. Huldah stepped forward and opened the gate fully, her voice welcoming but strong. "Come in," she said. "This is a place for all hearts willing to listen." The boys hesitated. One kicked a stone, scowling. Another looked at the ground, embarrassed. Finally, the tallest among them stepped forward. We heard that God can forgive anyone," he mumbled. "Even us?" Huldah nodded, her eyes warm as the sun. "Especially you," she said. "Come, sit." They crowded into the courtyard, eyes darting nervously. Huldah knelt among them, her hands resting on her knees, her voice low and calm. "You are not too young to hear God's voice," she told them. "He doesn't measure worth by age or by what others think of you. He looks at your heart." One of the boys sniffled and wiped his nose on his sleeve. "I stole figs from the merchant's cart," he confessed suddenly, his words tumbling out like pebbles from a jar. "I thought God wouldn't care." Huldah didn't scold. Instead, she touched his hand gently. "God cares about every choice," she said. "But more than your mistakes, He cares that you come back to Him honestly. Tell Him the truth, and He will meet you there." Another boy leaned forward. "What if we mess up again?" he asked, his voice cracking. Huldah gave a small laugh, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then you get up again," she said. "You keep coming back. God's love is not a one-time gift. It's a river that keeps flowing even when you stumble." The boys exchanged glances. Slowly, their shoulders dropped. One by one, they began to pray in their rough, awkward voices, sometimes stopping to find words, sometimes breaking into tears. Huldah closed her eyes and prayed along silently, her heart burning with gratitude. Later that evening, when the boys had left, promising to return, Huldah sat back against the courtyard wall. She watched the shadows lengthen and the first star appear in the sky. She realized that revival had become something far beyond what she had first imagined. It was not just about a king's decree or a smashed idol. It was about small moments, trembling voices in the dark, young boys confessing under the fig tree, new songs sung in dusty homes. She thought of the king again and prayed for him softly, her words slipping into the twilight. Strengthen him, Lord. Let these hearts echo his courage. Let them rise up around him like a forest of strong oaks. A breeze rustled the olive branches above her, as if heaven itself whispered back, I am doing more than you can see. Huldah pressed her hand over her heart, tears blurring her vision. She understood then that her work wasn't just to speak truth once, but to nurture it like a hidden flame. In mothers, in elders, in children, in restless boys with dusty knees. And as night finally wrapped the city in deep blue, Huldah felt a fierce joy grow inside her. The joy of seeing God's mercy spill into unexpected corners, lighting up places even she had not dared to dream of. That night, Huldah couldn't sleep. She sat in her courtyard under the stars, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The lamp burned low beside her, casting gentle shadows across the stones. She thought about the boys who had come that day, the women before them, the old iron worker, the young mother with her baby. Each one carried a story like a sealed jar, and God had started to open each one, pouring out old shame and filling them with light. Lord, she whispered, her voice breaking the hush of the night, how many more hearts do you want to reach? How many more lost and lonely voices are waiting to hear your name? A sudden thought struck her. Maybe there were people outside the city who had not yet heard, families in nearby villages who still clung to old idols because no one had told them another way. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Could she go beyond Jerusalem? Could she help plant seeds of truth beyond her quiet courtyard? Huldah leaned back, looking up at the night sky. It felt endless, full of unseen paths and new possibilities. She closed her eyes, feeling her heartbeat steady and strong. Show me where to go, she prayed softly. Lead me. Even if it is far from these walls, let your words find every hidden corner. The next morning, before the sun rose, she packed a small basket with dried figs and bread, tied her shawl tightly, and stepped into the early dawn. As she walked down the narrow street, she noticed neighbors stirring, peeking from doorways. A woman sweeping her steps paused and called out, "Huldah! Are you going somewhere?" Huldah stopped and turned, her face peaceful and sure. "Yes," she answered. "God's words are not meant to stay in one place. They are meant to walk." The woman tilted her head, puzzled but strangely moved. Further down the path, a merchant recognized her and rushed to offer a small jar of honey. "Take this," he urged. "May it sweeten your journey." Huldah accepted it with gratitude, tucking it carefully into her basket. Each gesture felt like a quiet blessing, a reminder that her message had already started softening hearts without her even realizing it. She reached the city gate as the sun crept over the horizon, turning the sky gold and pink. She paused there, breathing deeply, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. Turning to look back at Jerusalem, she whispered, "You are waking up now. Keep listening. Keep turning." Then she faced forward, her steps light but firm. She didn't know exactly where she would go or who she would meet, but she carried more than food and honey. She carried a message stronger than walls, braver than kings, gentler than morning dew. As she walked beyond the city, she imagined small homes waiting to hear, children running to tell their neighbors, old idols trembling in fear of being torn down. With every step, Huldah felt God's Spirit moving ahead of her, preparing hearts she had never seen, planting courage she would never fully witness. She realized her journey had become an echo of God's love, a quiet, unstoppable ripple moving far beyond her courtyard and out into the wide, waiting world. Huldah walked for hours along dusty paths lined with wildflowers and olive trees. The morning sun rose higher, warming her back and turning each leaf into a tiny mirror of light. Soon she saw a small village ahead, clay homes clustered together, smoke curling up from morning fires, a few goats wandering lazily between gardens. She paused at the edge of the path, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. A group of children noticed her first. One bold boy ran up, his hair sticking up wildly. "Who are you?" he demanded, his eyes squinting at her basket. Huldah knelt so her eyes met his. "My name is Huldah," she said kindly. "I came to share words about the one true God, the God who made all this." She spread her hands wide to include the trees, the sky, the laughing children. The boy tilted his head, considering her. Then without warning, he grinned and ran back to the other children, shouting, "Come, a woman with a story." Soon, more children gathered, and a few curious adults peeked from doorways. A grandmother stepped forward, leaning heavily on a crooked cane. "What story could be worth leaving the city for?" she asked, her voice rough but curious. Huldah stood slowly, looking at each face with warm eyes. "A story about a God who doesn't live in stone idols or wooden statues," she began. "A God who wants hearts more than sacrifices. A God who listens when we cry and stands close when we feel alone." Silence wrapped around the little group. The grandmother shuffled closer, her eyes softening. "My husband always prayed to carve stones," she said, voice trembling. "I thought that was the only way, but I always hoped there was someone real listening beyond them." Huldah reached out and took the old woman's hand. "There is," she whispered. "He has always been listening, even when you thought no one heard." The woman's lip quivered. She dropped her cane and fell to her knees, right there on the dirt path, burying her face in her hands. A hush fell over the whole village square. A few people began to kneel beside her. A young father, a teenage girl, a woman carrying a basket of figs. One by one, they lowered themselves, hearts heavy but open. Huldah set her basket down and moved among them, touching shoulders, whispering prayers. She didn't offer fancy words, she just helped them speak the truth that had been buried in their chests for too long. A small girl tugged on Huldah's sleeve, eyes wide. "Does God love me even if I have nothing to give him?" she asked in a voice barely above a squeak. Huldah knelt, brushed the girl's cheek and smiled through her tears. "Oh, little one," she said softly, "he loves you most when you come with empty hands and a true heart." The girl's eyes filled with tears and she threw her arms around Huldah's neck. As the sun began to slide lower in the sky, Huldah looked around and felt a deep warmth spread through her bones. This was not a grand temple or a king's court. It was a dirt path in a small village. Yet here, hearts were turning. And that was more precious than any crown or scroll. She knew then that her journey would not end in this village. Many more paths waited, many more small courtyards and dusty streets, each one holding hearts hungry for truth. But for now, she stayed. She would teach these people to pray, to speak honestly with God, to build a new kind of worship that started not with stone, but with living hearts. And in that simple gathering surrounded by Weeping grandmothers, curious children, and kneeling farmers, Huldah saw the truest picture of revival. Soft as a whisper, bright as the dawn, unstoppable as the wind. That evening, as the last glow of sunlight washed the village in a soft orange light, Huldah sat with the people around a small fire. The grandmother who had first knelt now sat beside her, eyes red but peaceful, her hand resting on Huldah's arm as if afraid she might vanish. A young father handed Huldah a small bowl of lentil stew. "Please eat," he insisted, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given us so much more than food today." Huldah accepted it gratefully, taking a small spoonful. She looked around the circle, faces worn from hard work, children dozing against their mothers, young men leaning forward, eyes bright with new wonder. She put her bowl aside and folded her hands in her lap. "Listen closely," she said, her voice strong but warm, rising just enough to carry over the crackle of the fire. "You don't need to wait for a temple or a priest to come near to God," she told them. "He wants to hear your voices tonight, tomorrow morning, in your fields and your kitchens. Speak to Him honestly. Offer Him your joys, your fears, your mistakes. All of it." The people nodded, some tears glinting in the firelight. A young mother leaned forward. "But how will we know if we are doing it right?" she asked softly. Huldah smiled, her eyes shining. "There is no perfect way," she said. "God listens to a broken voice more eagerly than a perfect performance. If your words come from a true heart, they reach Him every time." The mother put her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. Then she looked up again, eyes shining with relief. Nearby, the bold young boy from earlier stood, holding his small wooden toy sword. He looked at Huldah and then at the fire. "I don't want to fight anymore," he announced suddenly. "I want to help people like you do." The group went quiet for a heartbeat. Then a ripple of soft laughter and smiles spread. Huldah reached out, touched the boy's shoulder, and said, "Helping others is the bravest kind of fight." As the stars blinked to life above them, one by one, people began to lift up their own prayers. Shy at first, then slowly louder, weaving together like a gentle song. Huldah leaned back, feeling her heart swell until it seemed too big for her chest. This was what she had been made for, she realized. Not just delivering a message once in Jerusalem, but tending to hearts like a gardener with tender shoots. When the last prayers quieted, the grandmother took Huldah's hands and looked deep into her eyes. "Will you stay with us?" she asked, voice trembling. Huldah squeezed her hands. "I will stay for a while," she promised. "But there are other villages, other hearts waiting. This is just the beginning." She stood and looked out past the edge of the village, imagining the winding paths beyond, the unseen faces waiting for a word of hope. A warmth rose in her chest. Not fear, not hesitation, but a soft, fierce excitement. She turned back to the people, her voice low but certain. God's truth isn't meant to stay hidden in scrolls or courtyards. It is meant to walk, to live among us, to heal us one by one. The grandmother pressed a kiss to Huldah's hand. The young father lowered his head, whispering, "Thank you, Lord." The children huddled closer together, their eyes wide with awe and sleepiness. Huldah breathed deeply, letting the night air fill her lungs. Tomorrow she would rise before dawn, gather her small basket, and follow the winding paths to the next village and the next, as far as God would take her. But tonight, under the endless sky, with the smell of smoke and new prayers rising all around her, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Huldah had become more than a prophetess. She had become a gentle flame carried from heart to heart, a living message that God's love could find anyone, anywhere. And in the quiet hush of the stars, she whispered one last prayer. Thank you for choosing me. Take me wherever your voice wants to be heard.